Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds, episode something something. I never get the episode numbers right. I can never keep track because I just sort of record these things whenever I feel like it. It's a bit weird in that regard. But today, I really wanted to talk to you about something that has cropped up recently. Fans of this show will remember my review of the recent Netflix series of The Haunting of Hill House, which I thought was sublimely beautiful as a piece of horror. Yes, even the ending. I know, even people who liked the show disliked the ending. They thought that it diluted the ethos of despair that surrounds the entire show. I didn't myself, or rather, I didn't think that it did so as a mistake. I thought the redemptive arc that the show provided was subtle enough. I thought that it worked really beautifully in context with the sheer human degradation that had pervaded the rest of the show. I was very, very, very impressed with it. So much so that it kind of baffled me because I came into it wanting to loathe it, especially after that awful, awful, awful 1999 adaptation. With all of the silly CG effects and whatnot, I loathed that, certainly. But we've recently had a teaser for the second season of what's coming next, and they've done exactly what I hoped they'd do. They are moving the story away from Hill House and from that mythology, because it's going to be very difficult now, given the stories that were told in the series. It's going to be very, very difficult going back and telling any more in it, because all the shocks have been had, all of the mythology has been exposed, all of the mechanics behind the house have been exposed. We know now. So we're going to be expecting something to happen. We're going to be anticipating constantly what is going and preempting it, which is death. It's kind of death for horror. What they've done is it looks like they're going to make the second series an adaptation of a totally different book. And it's one of I must say, it's not only one of my favourite books of all time, it's one of my favourite horror stories ever written. It's an urtext for quote-unquote haunted house stories, and you'll see what I mean when we get to it. The teaser that was put up is just a very simple title screen that says The Haunting of Bly Manor. Now, those of you, I'm sure there are some of you out there whose hackles have just gone up hearing that, who know what that means. Bly Manor is the central location in The Turn of the Screw, a very, very famous and infamous book by Henry James that is regarded by many as the text for haunted house stories. It's one of those books that, if you want to know how to do a good haunted house story, you read that. It is a stunning piece of work. It's one of those, like The Haunting of Hill House, funnily enough, it's one of those wonderful ghost stories that may in fact not be a ghost story at all. The book is phenomenally ambiguous on the matter. It suggests that there may be supernatural occurrences in this house. It suggests that there may be active, malicious, otherworldly entities in this house. It even suggests who those ghosts might be from the house's own past, but it never, ever, 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 ever comes out and says, this is what's happening. There are ghosts here. The vast majority of the book occurs through the perceptions of very particular characters, and we know from reading the book that those perceptions are warped from various factors. What we're actually seeing is a psychological portrait. It's almost like a Rorschach inkblot test. You don't know if what the protagonists are seeing is what they're seeing. You have no idea, and you don't know if how they're interpreting what they're seeing is legitimate, or it's a matter of them imposing their own biases and narratives and neuroses on the events, on the house, on the situation. Very much like Hill House in the both the original book and in the original 1963 film adaptation. You have exactly the same thing happening there, where you have lots of characters thrown together in this big, old, resonant house that has a very dark history behind it, and that has mythos, that has atmosphere, that has something, some almost animus seeping from the walls, as though it is darkly alive and intelligent. But you never know. You never know. What it does is the environment somehow emphasizes their traumas and their psychological problems. It almost allows them to project them. It allows them to rake their own subconsciouses in the same way that LSD might. So you don't know in the original Haunting whether there are ghosts or whether characters are slowly going mad. And that is exactly the same thing you get in The Turn of the Screw. It's even more, I would argue it's even more disturbing in The Turn of the Screw because it involves both traumatized women, sort of family dynamics, how women relate to fathers and to male authoritarian figures. There's this really quite unpleasant friction, a tension there that's very, very unpleasant, but it also explores problematic and damaging relationships that adults have with both their own childhoods and with children. There is a very nasty, unspoken element to The Turn of the Screw. It never comes out and says, this is what is happening. Ever, at any point. You don't know what is psychological, what is supernatural, whether there is any of the latter or not. But there is this very, very, very unpleasant thing going on in The Turn of the Screw, where it feels like what is happening is the principal character is projecting her neuroses onto a boy who is in her charge, and her relationship with that boy is very, very, very problematic. Let's put it that way. It's not only problematic, it borders on... In fact, it doesn't just border on the abusive, it becomes kind of abusive. It's really quite unpleasant. And she kind of projects her neuroses onto the children, which makes them see things and experience things and interpret what they're experiencing through the lens of her narratives, of her neuroses, of her problems. And it becomes this really unpleasant exploration of psychosis and how psychosis kind of transmits from one person to another if the psychoses themselves are suitably expressive and narrativized, and if the subjects, those around the person who's experiencing them, are suitably impressionable, i.e. children, or say the mentally disturbed, or just someone who is mentally weak or whatever. It's really, really bloody unpleasant. I remember reading the book for the first time, and I didn't know what was going on. I'd never seen the film adaptations of The Turn of the Screw, and I'd never read it before, but I was reading it, and I was thinking to myself, this isn't going where I think it's going, is it? This book is not going to explore these subjects. And then you start to realise that's exactly what it's doing. And you get this hideous, creeping, cold rush of realisation. And it's so distressing. It's so deeply disturbing without showing you a single spectre or phenomena that can be determined, that can be that is objectively there. It's beautifully brilliant and clever, just like the Haunting of Hill House, the original book and film. What you get is this sense of an environment, of a house, of a structure that has history, and as a result of that history and narrative, it has a kind of animus of its own. It has a kind of strange life of its own that's only activated when particularly resonant people enter it. And it feels as though it's acting as a giant psychic amplifier, just like Hill House, for this woman and her problems, and it's making them way more overt and way stronger. If there are ghosts in The Turn of the Screw, then they are the ghosts of the human psyche. They're the ghosts that we create and project of our own fears, of our own disturbances and traumas. That's what the ghosts are. She weaves herself into this mythology that derives from stories she's been told about Bly, and she becomes a part of them. And in that she finds some sort of, I don't know, it's not even a kind of salvation, because it isn't. Not in this book. Believe me, there's no fucking salvation in this book. None whatsoever. It's more a place and a purpose and a sense of poetry that she otherwise lacks. It's so weird and beautiful, and it's so earnest, it's so honest. That's what I love about it. It's a warts and all raking of a broken mind, of a shattered mind, and it doesn't shy away from it. It shows you even though the character is the one that you're supposed to identify with, the heroine, the one who is trying to save the children from the evil spirits, it shows you everything about her, and you don't hate her for being what she is, but you find it very, very distressing. You can't fully identify with her as a heroine or as a protagonist because you start to realize what's happening. If anything, she's kind of pitiable. There is a pitiable element to her because she is broken from the first instance. She is entirely broken. And it's you, as the reader, sharing her descent into this fevered delirium. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, The Turn of the Screw is a stunning book and so horrific. It's quiet, slow-burning horror, where it doesn't even come across as horror for the longest time, until you start to reach those moments, until you start to engage with it and you start to realise what's actually happening. Then it starts to creep up, and it shifts from being a ghost story to being this even more distressing thing about broken minds and about how they share their disease in the manner of a venereal infection. It's so cool. It is a beautifully written, moribund, kind of misanthropic text, because all of the human characters in it are fairly unpleasant, it has to be said. Even the children have their moments. They're not innocents, which is ironic, given that the film adaptation is called The Innocents. The original film adaptation, that is, which is a black and white film, and cleaves very, very closely to the text. It is absolutely stunning. It realises Bly in the most beautiful manner. And it's one of those adaptations that gets what the original book is about. It gets that it's about architecture. It's about storytelling through establishing shots of architecture and through atmosphere, not through characters sitting around talking about what's happening, not through exposition. There's a lot of shots in The Innocents which are totally unnecessary and totally silent and motionless. Nothing is going on. It's just showing you the house, and all you're getting is this cold sense of foreboding and ominousness. You know that something is going to happen, and something tragic. You know that something has already happened here, but that history is going to repeat itself. It's stunning. It is absolutely stunning. It's such a beautiful adaptation. Many people will know this story, but they'll know it from The Others. The Others with Nicole Kidman was also an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw. But The Others, it gets it very wrong for my money. I don't like The Others very much because it's too overt. It's way too overt. It makes it so that there actually are supernatural things going on. There are definitely ghosts. There is this big twist at the end, a sort of M. Night Shyamalan style twist, which I hate. I absolutely loathe that in cinema and in fiction, full stop. And it establishes very absolutely that there is this happening and this happening and this happening. That's not the strength of the original story. That's not the strength of The Turn of the Screw. It's certainly not the strength of The Innocents. There is ambiguity here, as there must necessarily be about any story that deals with the human mind and psyche. Now, this is going to prove a challenge, I feel, for the creators of The Haunting of Hill House, if this is the story they're going to follow, because in order for it to work, it cannot be like their adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House. It cannot have it so that there actually are ghosts, and that they are absolutely established so that you see them, and they are there, and that is it, you know. It's going to have to be far more ambiguous if it's going to work, for my money. You can see the ghosts, you can have them, but they're going to have to be viewed through the perceptions of very particular characters, and there's going to have to be a lot of doubt as to whether they actually exist or not. That's how it's going to have to work, for me anyway. It's not going to work if it takes the path of The Others and it establishes absolutely that there are ghosts and that they are here and that they have this agenda and this intention. That's not going to work for me. The original Turn of the Screw and The Innocents they are psychological works rather than supernatural works. They are ghost stories, technically. In fact, they are the most superlative haunted house stories in existence, for my money. But they are they are haunted house and ghost stories in the most metaphorical and abstract sense possible, i.e., whatever hauntings exist in Bly are projected there by the manor's inhabitants, by the people. They're not sort of saturated into the walls. They're not spirits lodged in the stones or anything like that. No, 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 no. That it's about the ghosts of the human mind. That's what the Turn of the Screw is about, and what this new adaptation must ideally be about. First of all, if only to differentiate it from their adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, because one of the things the Netflix series of The Haunting of Hill House did was it established that there actually are ghosts here, which is something the original novel and certainly the film adaptation of 1963 does not. In fact, the film adaptation goes out of its way to establish there are not ghosts in Hill House. It's all in the mind of Nell in the original film. Everything is about psychology and neurosis and broken minds. It's a very sad, solemn portrait of the state of our inner worlds and of how they can drive us to suicidal flights of fantasy. That's what the original Haunting is about. And to a lesser degree, it's also what the Turn of the Screw is about. But in the Turn of the Screw, it's not so much suicidal as, well, you'll see. You'll see if you read it. And if you go and watch The Innocents, which I would heartily recommend, because The Innocents is a sublime film. It's one of my utmost favourites. If I ever have the inclination to write a haunted house story, that and the original Haunting are the films I will go and watch, because they are phenomenal. And ironically, as I said earlier, both of them are ghost stories without ghosts. Or at least ostensibly without ghosts, in the literal sense. In that, in neither story are there phantoms, are there ghosts wandering around. Whatever ghosts do exist are kind of hallucinatory. It's hard to tell what is real and what is not, and that is their strength. That's why they're so disturbing. It actually makes you share in the delusions of the disturbed protagonist, so you start to identify with them. You get drawn into that state of delusion where you're not sure whether there are ghosts or not. It is absolutely superb. That level of collusion is essential, absolutely essential in these kinds of stories, and I can only sincerely hope that they get it right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I will be back shortly with more rambly stuff. Until then, bye-bye.